Great, thank you very much. So thank you everyone for coming to this first meeting of the Region 3 Stakeholder Advisory Committee. Welcome everyone. And again, my name is Patrick Hughes. I'm a senior planner in the Long Range Planning Division of the Office of Planning and Zoning. And I've got a couple of colleagues who are here with me, Andrew Lazarum, Mike Stringer in the back here, and also Desiree Williams, who is at the door as well. We have several speakers here. I will let you all introduce yourselves as you come up to give your presentations in a little bit. We brought them in as experts to help share some information about natural environment and history issues as they relate to your work here for Region 3 planning. The first announcement that I want to make is I want to recognize our chair and vice chair. So the county executive has appointed our chair and vice chair, and so I would like to thank Dr. Jason Morgan and also Alyssa Jones, who will be serving as chair and vice chair for the committee. So, and I will, I can turn it over to you, and then I guess you can turn it back over to me for housekeeping and this sort of.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. I'm not going to stand until I have my back to everyone. Jason Morgan. I am not a medical doctor. In higher ed, I'm the other kind of doctor. So I work at Maryland Institute College of Art. I've been in higher ed for 15 years now. Background is in project management. Why am I here? I am a resident of Arundel County. I have a 7-year-old and a 9-year-old in school systems, and we hope to never move. So I figure you've got to be a part of the conversation in your community. So that's why I am here. In my background, higher ed, like I said, in project management. My role here, I think as it was explained to me today, is just to facilitate when necessary to gather whatever consensus information there is and provide it to the committee. Sure that will grow and change as we go. All right, Alyssa.
Hi, my name is Alyssa. I've been a resident of Anne Arundel County for 9 years now. I retired from the Navy last year and started my own business. And like he said, I want to stick around and just make sure that we're doing the right thing for our county. So I appreciate this opportunity to work with everybody. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, and I have one alibi, as I say. My wife is active duty military, and I am a proud military spouse. She's active duty at 18 years, looking to retire here. And I always tell everybody the most interesting thing about me is my wife, right? She's much more interesting than me. And so she is very active in the community as well and encourages me to do these types of things.
Very good. Thank you all very much. So I'll go over just some quick housekeeping things. As we move through this meeting is really more about, we're going to have some presentations, but then we want to set aside a lot of time for you all to really talk, give us your thoughts, ask questions of our experts, and really just discuss these issues as they relate to environmental and the history of this region. As you speak, try to kind of state your name before you speak. That's in case we have any Zoom attendees, or as you notice, we are recording the meeting and we will put that online. So that just kind of helps for future reference. We do have some snacks at the back of the room. We have, I've talked about Halloween candy and the apples and everything, water, help yourselves, okay, at any point. Also, if you need restrooms, those are out the door and to the right if you need those. I am going to be sending some emails to some folks tomorrow. I still need a couple of biographies from some folks. I think I got those from most people. So if you haven't gotten that to us, we're gonna, you'll get an email from me tomorrow, as well as I need a signature on the procedures document from one person, and we do need the ethics certificates from several of you, about half of you. Still need to complete the training. That's an online thing. So if you haven't done that and you've lost the email, look for it tomorrow. We will send that to you. And we do need to get that from everyone. We are setting up a Google Drive that will hold all of our SAC materials. I don't think that we've sent a link to you all yet about that. We have. Okay, good. All right. So periodically we will be dropping things into that, and we will send you, links and remind you that that will be sort of a repository of information for you all. So if you're not sure where something is, be sure to look there. A couple of announcements real quick. Just so you know where we are in the process, we do have our comprehensive zoning application. This is for property owners who want to apply for a zoning change on their property. That is a part of this process, and you all are going to review all of these applications. So that application is on the web now, and it is open for property owners to apply for a zoning change through the end of November. So if you all are in communication with your networks, feel free to let people know about that and send people to our website, which is aacounty.org/region3. And we are also going to have, I'm going to talk a little bit more about this, but we will have, staff is going to have an open house on November 28th to present to the public some initial thoughts related to what comes out of this discussion tonight. So I'll talk a little bit more about that as we move through this. So next slide, please. Kind of did the first thing on there. So just really quick, what we're looking to do tonight, just to give you an orientation. We're going to first ground ourselves in the history of the region by hearing from Darian Beverungen with our Cultural Resources Division in Planning and Zoning. And then we're going to pivot to talk about environmental issues. And we've put this topic first, really, because it's one of the top concerns that we hear from people in the county. A lot of concerns about environmental protection. So we brought in subject matter experts who will talk about water quality, tree planting, land conservation, and these things. They're going to give you brief presentations, but then the bulk of this will be an opportunity for you all to talk and ask questions and really try to unpack some of the issues and share with us your thoughts about what some of the key needs and things are that you're hearing on the ground in your communities. There's a lot that we can get into in these topics. We're going to try to keep things focused. One goal that we want to try to take away from this meeting is some ideas for recommendations to consider in the region plans. If you had a chance to look at the background document that we sent out, you saw just a very initial start of some of those potential Region 3 recommendations. So that's just a start. We can address those, talk more about those, and whatever. But please, we will welcome any recommendations or ideas that you have, even if they're just rough at this point. So next slide. I am going to go through a quick update of the region plan process. Some of this we talked about during the kickoff meeting. The region plan is going to focus on primarily the Severn and Glen Burnie area, a little bit getting into the Millersville area, and we want to focus on evaluating the assets and needs of this area and develop a shared vision, particularly for future land use. That's really the centerpiece of this region plan. And we want to refine the strategies that were developed for the countywide GDP, refine them and figure out how to really apply and implement them at this regional level. We're going to blend the technical knowledge of staff with local knowledge of the community that you all help bring. Public engagement is a key part of this process, and we are reaching out and will continue to reach out several times throughout the process. And so I'll talk a little bit more about that. Next slide, please. You saw this at the kickoff meeting. I won't go too deep into this, but obviously a key point, our key piece of land use is our growth projections and figuring out how do we accommodate growth that is anticipated for this region, and what are the areas where we think that growth should go, and then what areas need to really be preserved as they are now, whether those are natural areas or stable neighborhoods that need to sort of retain a certain character. The region plans fit into this larger growth management schema here by, you see the large central yellow cog represents the overall general development plan. The region plan and other master plans are kind of a secondary cog there that need to interact and be consistent with that overall general development plan for the county. So we will try to build on the strategies from the countywide plan, but we don't want to repeat those in our region plan. We will try to identify issues that may be addressed in more detail in functional plans or in capital improvement projects, but we don't necessarily have to try to pin down every detail of that while we're working out our strategies for the region plan. Our strategies will really just kind of support and direct some of that work and help prioritize some of that. Next slide, please. So your role as the committee, we talked about this at the kickoff. It's really a forum for you all to share your knowledge and to learn from others, whether it's staff or subject matter experts, and to really be a key and constructive partner with us in developing this region plan and its strategies. Some of you have mentioned wanting to actively help in community outreach. We want you to help share what you're doing here with your networks and with your community. We don't expect you to go door to door, knocking on every door in your neighborhood. That's a little bit more than what we would expect. This is a volunteer gig, and it's already intensive enough. But your existing networks that you're already plugged into, share the information that we're putting out with them and what we're doing. Make yourself a resource to folks. And if you need anything from us, as you're trying to reach out to folks, please feel free and to reach out and say, hey, I could use some flyers for this event, or something to post on social media or whatever. We can get you those kinds of things. Next slide, please. You also saw this graphic in our kickoff meeting, but just very quickly, this is our overall process. We're in the plan development phase now, so we're doing some of the background analysis, but we've started to move into some of the plan development with this first meeting. The public survey, we had a public survey that went out on some vision statement ideas that closed on November 1st, and we are working on a summary that we will share with you, a summary of all of the public input that we got on that. Based on what we discussed at our first meeting, we have some key themes to work on, like the importance of the natural environment, built character, preservation, connection with the water, and we'll make time in upcoming meetings to talk about a vision statement. That's kind of a broad, overarching statement that will help provide some direction and focus for the region plan and all of the different topical strategies that will come under that overall umbrella. Next slide, please. And these are going to be our topics for the next series of meetings. And I actually meant to get in here and put in the dates for our next meetings, and I didn't do that. But these will all be on our hub site, aacounty.org/region3. So just to give you a sense of where we are in the process now, we're going to have these several topical meetings, and then once we get into this fifth meeting, that's when we're going to start really getting deeper into planned land use, future land use, and start to talk about zoning needs in the region. And then by the 6th and 7th meeting, we're going to actually, those are mapping exercises. We will actually look at what is the zoning on the ground, what needs to be preserved as is, and where do we need to think about changing the zoning in different areas. And some of that will be based on some of the conversations in the prior meetings, and we will work through it as we move forward. But tonight, our focus is on the history and the environment. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Darian. I guess before, if y'all have any questions, this is feeling a little bit more formal than I was hoping for. So feel free to speak up and interject as we talk. But did y'all have any questions about or comments on anything so far?
Just the first name.
Very good. Thank you.
Well, hello, everyone. My name is Darian Beverongen, and I work in the Cultural Resources section in the Office of Planning and Zoning. And our purview is over historic buildings and districts, archaeology sites, historic cemeteries, and scenic and historic roads.
Please speak as loud as you can, because my hearing is
Okay.
like that.
I'm sorry. I will do my best, I promise. So tonight I'm going to provide you with a brief overview of the history of the region, because I think it's important to understand how the area developed, which can provide insights into how or why it is the way that it is today. Next slide. The history and development of Region 3 is linked historically to the region's geographical position in the county, and later to the growth and development of Glen Burnie in particular, and for its strategic location within Anne Arundel County's major transportation corridor. Headwaters for three major rivers, the Patapsco, Patuxent, and the Severn, have their origins in the region, which has directed its historical development beginning in prehistoric times. Access to fresh water in the Chesapeake Bay made the area a favorite spot for Native Americans because of the bountiful supply of fish, crabs, and oysters. These early inhabitants first appeared in the area approximately 13,000 years ago. And one of the earlier sites to be discovered in the region was located near BWI and dates to over 11,000 years ago. Another discovery was found near Marley Station Mall, and there archaeologists found the earliest intact cooking hearths known to be found in Maryland. Another important site in the region is the Magathy Quartzite Quarry, which actually is located just east of Region 3. But this is where Native Americans extracted materials for making projectile points and other tools. And the quarry spurred a trading network among Native peoples and the area's position between two watersheds, creating a region of trails and footpaths. And it was these trails and footpaths that would later become the first transportation routes of European settlers. Next slide. So the first European settlement in the county occurred in 1649 when Protestant Englishmen from Virginia established a hamlet on the Severn River in Providence. By the early 18th century, plantations were established where people grew tobacco, corn, and grains. The region also had an abundance of timber, but another industry that took off in the region during the colonial period was the iron smelting industry. Iron ore outcrops were located along Stony Run and Piney Run and were exploited early in the 18th century. Caleb and Edward Dorsey formed a joint business with Alexander Lawson and built the Curtis Creek Iron Furnace on present-day Furnace Branch. The company would go on to be sold in 1772 and again in 1854 to William Wilkins Glenn, who founded the Curtis Creek Mining, Furnace, and Manufacturing Company. Next. By the 19th century, the region had attracted numerous farming families. There was a shift at this time from growing tobacco and grains to fruit and vegetables to sell at the markets in Baltimore or beyond, which is also known as truck farming. This was very popular as a popular agricultural practice, particularly in northern Anne Arundel County. Seasonal laborers, who were mostly Eastern European immigrants, were brought down from Baltimore to local farms where they lived in picker shanties for 6 to 8 weeks while they worked on the farms during harvest season. And this photo here is an example of a shanty, and this one was located on the Bottomley Farm on Fort Smallwood Road. Truck farming remained a primary source of income for many residents in the northern part of the county well into the 20th century. The arrival of the railroads, though, had a huge impact on the region. The Severn area changed dramatically with the arrival of the Baltimore and Potomac Railroad in 1868, and then by the Washington, Baltimore, and Annapolis Electric Railroad in 1908. The original town of Severn grew up around the railroad tracks, but never amounted to more than a small crossroad village. The village served the local community as it had a general store, post office, blacksmith shop, church, and a school. Businesses and residences were clustered near the tracks along Severn Station Road and to the east along Old Camp Mead Road. It remained very much a small railroad town into the 20th century. Now, only remnants of that early village can still be seen. The railroads also had an impact on the Glen Burnie area, specifically with the construction of the Annapolis and Baltimore Short Line in 1887. The Glen family saw this as an advantage and set aside 3,000 acres of the family's 9,000-acre Curtis Creek Mining Company land for a suburban village named Glen Burnie. By 1894, the town consisted of just a few buildings along Crane Highway.
And you wait a minute till they get that screen. So
There we go. The oldest extant building belonged to Samuel Sewell Tracy and is located at the corner of Padfield Boulevard Southeast and 2nd Avenue. Other early entrepreneurs who contributed to the early development of Glen Burnie included William Keithy, Dr. Thomas Brayshaw, and Albert Hamlin, and the Woodball family. In 1908, Hamlin and others formed the Glen Burnie Improvement Association, which helped finance the town's first public amenities and the volunteer fire company. Within Region 3, there are two prominent historic African-American communities that also contributed to the growth and development of the region. Freetown, which is one of the oldest and largest African-American communities in the county, is located in the eastern portion of the region. A free Black named James Spencer purchased 56 acres in 1845 in the Freetown vicinity. His land purchases, as well as those of others like William Howard, Edmund Franklin, Abraham Franklin, and Robert Curry, provided an anchor for the community. By the 1880s, the early landowners and their descendants had amassed 1,000 acres of land stretching between Marley and Stony Creeks. There they established a safe haven with homes, schools, and churches for African Americans. Another historic African American community in the region is Queenstown, which is located in Severn. The community was founded after the Civil War in 1880. The first landowners were members of the Queen family. Other families, notably the Gaithers, followed by purchasing lots to farm, and many descendants of the Queen and Gaither families still live there. And like other landowners in the region, many of the residents in these communities were truck farmers. Each community also had a Rosenwald school, which were schools built between 1911 and 1932 to educate African American children. These schools, which are designated as historic, are pictured here, and they all still stand today. Next. So moving into the late 19th and early 20th century, the industrial growth and development of Baltimore, as well as the automobile era, had a direct impact on the region and the Glen Burnie area in particular. Companies brought employment to the area residents, and the construction of B&A Boulevard in 1912, and then the incorporation of Light Street Road into Crane Highway shortly thereafter brought a lot of traffic to the area, with people commuting to and from Baltimore. To help divert the congestion away from the center of town, federal government contributed funds toward the construction of Ritchie Highway between 1934 and 1938. This was followed by a number of subdivisions, which was being built on the outskirts of the original platted town, starting in the 1940s, like Arundel, which was the first post-World War II community to be built. Ritchie Highway became a commercial strip, which led to the decline of the shopping area in historic Fort Glen Burnie. By 1951, over 1,000 new homes have been built within a 2-mile radius of downtown Glen Burnie. The town continued to sprawl into what it is today, but the original historic core of Glen Burnie still exists.
Yeah, today, election day.
Next. Okay, so some historic resources. There are a number of historic resources within the region that represent the broad patterns of history that have made a contribution to the development of the region, including agriculture, transportation, industry, and suburban development patterns. I've already mentioned the Rosenwald schools located in Freetown, Queenstown, and there is one in Marley Neck. Not only are they locally significant, but they are also listed in the National Register of Historic Places. In addition to those, some of the other more prominent resources include the Glen Burnie Historic District, which has been determined eligible for the National Register, and the Basil Smith Farm quarter for the enslaved located in Severn, which is also eligible for the National Register. And it is known to be the only stone quarter for the enslaved in the county. Next. And while I'm happy to say that all of those are still standing, sadly, others have been lost or are threatened. A continued growth and development of the region has had an impact on the preservation of historic resources. And these are just 3 examples. The first picture is of a stone that was used as a pulpit during 19th century Methodist camp meetings in the Marley Neck community. It is inscribed with a Roman cross and the initials J.H. Hall. It was discovered on land historically owned by the Hall family, and it was found during an archaeological survey that was required for the Creekside Village development project. And in order to preserve it, the stone was relocated to the Hall United Methodist Church on Solly Road. Historic cemeteries are another cultural resource that are threatened. There are over 500 reported historic cemeteries in the county, but many are unmarked or have been abandoned. And while we do have a framework for legal protections in the code, they are under threat from development in some cases, natural forces, and abandonment or neglect. However, these protections can only be enforced if we know that a cemetery exists. And one example of a cemetery that was threatened was the Dacre Cemetery in Point Pleasant. It was impacted by vandalism from theft of its tombstones and unpermitted grading, as you can see in this photo. Once the headstones were stolen, the cemetery fell into neglect, which encouraged encroachment and further desecration. This is one of the many orphan cemeteries in the county, and there are legal challenges when enforcing what few cemetery protections are available through our local zoning and development laws if there's no clearly defined landowner in the land record. For this one, at least, though, volunteers and members of the Arundel Genealogical Society got together and they had a cleanup day. So it looks much better now than it does in that picture. But there are still many historic cemeteries out there that we just don't know of. A lost resource in the region was the Micklaw store in Severn. The general store was located at the end of Severn Station Road in the original core of the village, about 300 feet from the railroad tracks. The store was owned and operated by Joseph and Marie Micklaws throughout much of the 20th century. But after Marie passed away, the store, as well as the buildings on the property, fell into disrepair, and eventually they were all demolished in 2014. Again, these are just a few examples, and I'm sorry I'm not ending on more of a high note, but that just kind of gives you an idea of the different types of resources that we have in Region 3. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
Can you put your slide deck with our Region 3 on our Region 3 Google page?
Yeah, we'll be doing all presentations.
Okay.
Is there an opportunity for the region plan that we're developing to have a historical element to it, or is it just like the existing regional classification?
Well, there are policies in each region plan, and if you can.
Yeah,
work with that.
so within the first round of region plans, there were some additional cultural resource related strategies that came out of those. There is a framework that's already set countywide in the general development plan, so probably we should let's hear what ideas we have, and then we'll see first. It may already be addressed countywide, and then if there are ways to apply it at the region level or drill down a little bit further, then yeah, we'll bring it into the region plan. Absolutely.
There's not a lot of organizations that are starting to do like land acknowledgements in their written, before meetings, or if there's a written document, they'll acknowledge the ancestry of the land, right? And that goes along with honoring the history, as well as like some of the historical sites, right? The idea is to preserve some of these sites. How do we build that into the regional plan?
I'm in favor of that. So yes.
As we look to honor, so as, you know, the rock being moved, but as we look to honor this opportunity, as we also think about the growth, are there regulations that exist that would tell us, you can or cannot, or we would consider or would not consider, like, I'm gonna make this up, but you know, we can put a solar farm high above, the cemeteries, such that we can both, you know, have new sources of, you know, sustainable energy and honor the historic cemeteries.
Right, well, so in Article 17 of the code, which is the subdivision and development section of the county code, that has the bulk of the cultural resources regulations in it as far as new development goes. So we do look at, you know, what impact the new development will have on whether it's a historic building, archaeology, or a cemetery, or on a scenic and historic road. There is a specific code reference for solar farms and solar arrays. I forget the exact code section,
That may
but
not be a good example, it was just a.
but there is, I mean, there is regulations in place, and that is something that we do look at, because I get it, you know, solar energy is great, but it could also impact, you know, a resource and really set, you know, the setting. And, you know, especially with the cemetery, we wouldn't, you know, want that to happen. So yes, there are things in code that will protect that.
Alyssa Jones, I was wondering, is there an effort to find the cemeteries that might be out there, or what, how many do we know of compared to the 500? It just seems like that's so many.
Right. There are a lot. And so our office, we partner a lot with the Arundel Genealogical Society. They have a cemetery committee. I don't know if you know, Tina Simmons is the head. She's the chair of that committee. And for decades, Tina has been scouring the county, finding these lost cemeteries, because many are unmarked and they were on private property. They didn't have headstones, you know, so if you know, we don't know about them, we can't protect them. So yes, between her work that she's done, and sometimes we come across something through the development review. You know, we might require an archaeology survey because, you know, on one of those historic maps, which was on the first slide, you know, we could see like, okay, well, this was a historic property, or this says there's a cemetery here. Maybe we should look into that. So we would require an archaeology survey, and it's possible that the cemetery might come about through that discovery, or at least the boundaries. That's what we're hoping. But there are just so many that I'm sure we don't know about. Again, because they're on private property, and unless we get a development project in, we're not really taking a look. So if you know of any, you know, please contact us, and I can double check to see if we know about it. That would be great. Yes.
What do you, sorry, this is Emily Haney. What do you do when you find one on private property?
A cemetery. Well, an easement is required. Through the development process, we require a protection easement, which gives a 25-foot buffer around the known boundary of the cemetery, and usually some sort of public right-of-way access. Because a lot of times to descendants of these families, they might not live here anymore, but they might still want to come and visit. So they need to be able to have that access to come. So, but usually easements are required to protect them. Yes.
Even on, if it's private property, you would still, the county would essentially take it as eminent domain or?
No, only if the property owner applies for, like, if they're subdividing their property, if they're applying for a permit, like a grading permit or something like that, then yes, we review all those types of development projects. And if it turns out that they do have a cemetery, then through the development regulations, the county can require a protective easement on the cemetery. But only again, if something gets triggered for our review. So they would have to apply for something. We just wouldn't go and say, you know, you need an easement on that. Yes.
Jason Morgan, so our historical, I'm curious from the developer standpoint, right? Our historical sites and topics, I don't know how to word it, but is it considered a hindrance or a positive thing. I'm just for my own sake. It seems like it would create more challenges to have to work around.
Both. I think it depends on the development project, and honestly who the developer is. We've had some projects, there was one, in Jessup, a big Elm Street development. There was a historic house there. It was a farm, a historic farm. They bought the property, they were turning it into apartments and condos, but they restored the historic house and made it part of their clubhouse for the community. And they took advantage of the county's historic tax credit program, which we have, and it's offered for both residential and commercial properties. So it just depends. But then on the other side, we do have development projects where you have this historic house again, which was a farm, but now the zoning has changed. So it's, zone W1 or, R5 or something, a more higher use, which allows for more density. And in those cases, sometimes that can become a problem because then the developer doesn't have a use for that old farmhouse anymore, so it can be a challenge, but I think it's a case by case basis, so. Anyone else?
Yeah, with the, seems like a lot, Rich Mag, revitalization of Glen Burnie, they're trying to, everybody want to see happen. So you mentioned in the slide that it's eligible to be registered as a historic. Is it not registered at this time?
So it's on the county inventory, which is the Maryland inventory of historic properties. The National Register is a higher designation. And so it's only eligible for the National Register. A formal nomination has not gone through to officially list it. But being eligible does give properties within the historic district boundary, it makes them available to the tax credits, both county and at the state level. So our county tax credits and the state are 25%. It's a rehabilitation tax credit. So if you're a contributing historic property within that historic district boundary and you want to rehab your building, you could potentially receive those tax credits as long as they follow preservation standards. But yes.
So that's positive for
that is a positive.
Owners to help push
Yeah.
Glen Burnie a little further.
Like I said, yes, and there was, like I said, a historic core still, as you all probably know, of historic downtown Glen Burnie, and I think revitalizing that and taking advantage of things like the tax credit program would be great, would be a benefit. So I wish more people knew about it. Please spread the word. So, anything else? Yes.
What is the one area in Region 3 that you think needs the most attention for planning?
As history goes, I mean, I would say the Glen Burnie area. I mean, I think it could be great. I mean, talk about walkability factor, all the commercial, the residences that are still close by. I mean, I think there's just a lot of potential, and so many people now are drawn to historic communities, and preservation, revitalization, they go hand in hand. And so I think if we could focus efforts there, I think it would be an asset for both preservation and commercial residential revitalization. So. Yes.
If the county purchases land that has historic buildings on it, do they make, for example, on Reese Road, they're building a park and it's on a historic farm and there are old abandoned barns. Is that kind of factored, like when it's coming from the county and not an outside developer?
Yes, we do an internal review as well. Usually Recreation and Parks will notify us and say, hey, we're looking at this property. Are there any historic resources or archaeology sites or things like that on the property? And we'll tell them, we do have to look at buildings though, again, on a case by case basis to look at structural integrity. Does it retain historic integrity and what's the significance of it? And so we kind of have to go, through that checklist to, figure out if they would be permitted to demolish anything or if they'd have to save them. There's, and I don't know what region it is, but there's another property, the county property on Severn Chapel Road, the Bacon Ridge, like near Crownsville, Millersville, that area. And there's historic tobacco barns. One's are a really early 19th century tobacco barn, and we said you cannot demolish that because it's just, such a rare building type. So they're gonna have to preserve it, and we're still working through that process. But yes, we do look at that. So. Anything else? Yeah. Well, thank you.
Transition then to the environment section.
So just in transition to the next section, the environment section, we have a little survey for you guys to do. So you can either scan the QR code and it will just take you to a quick question about what environmental issues are you most concerned about in Region 3. So you can either scan the QR code or you can go to menti.com and enter that code in. It should take you through that. You can, I think there's 3 options, 3 spaces for you to put in 3 different words that highlight the most important issues for you in this region. So if you click on the results, then it should take you to, we can see it.
I have to hit submit, like at the bottom.
Yeah.
You bring the results again? If any of you all want to move more to this side too, so you can see the TV, feel free to do that. You all right? Okay.
So we got water, trees, green space, historic preservation, deforestation, invasive species, access to parks, preservation, water. Cool. Great. Okay.
Let me comment on this for just a
Yeah.
second. Mike Stringer, we were just looking through, again, this morning kind of preparations meeting, the public comments we received, like through the vision questionnaire, and previously we had a feedback map up on the spring, where we got to put dots on maps and let us know concerns. This resonates a lot with what we heard. Some of the key things that we heard back from the community were, there were a few folks that are really interested in the invasive species thing, kind of saying that, look, our trees are being overrun by invasive vines, we need to have more proactive efforts to kind of control those. A lot of comments about green space access, especially, the region is diverse and it changes a lot as you go different places. So we heard a lot of that, especially from the Severn area. And when the county's Parks Department does their, about 5 or 8 years, they update their master plan, land preservation, parks recreation plan. They do a proximity analysis, so how close, how far people to parks, and an equity analysis, kind of overlaying that proximity with looking at socioeconomic factors. And that Severn area and Glen Burnie both kind of light up the areas that are underserved. So that resonates with their data, saying the community is also feeling that. And access, that some of these spaces might seem green, but I don't know where to park and how to get into it. They're kind of nearby, but I don't know how to get there. And definitely water quality questions. These are the reasons why actually it's great that it reflects, viewers are reflecting what we heard from the community, and that reflects too what we're going to be talking about there tonight. We kind of brought our experts from the county to talk about stormwater, talk about forest conservation, and then we'll talk about land preservation as well tonight. So nice to see that alignment of your guys' priorities and we're here as well. Okay. And with that, I introduce Eric Michelson. He's the Deputy Director for Public Works for the Bureau of Watershed Protection and Restoration.
Yeah, nice to see you all tonight. Going to be talking to you about the environment and water quality issues. Go to the next slide.
Yeah. No, I'm just getting a full screen again.
Yeah, I'm the Deputy Director for the Anne Arundel County Watershed Protection and Restoration Program. We are in charge of basically the county's water quality efforts associated with stormwater management and its regulatory obligations. Next slide, please. We'll talk a little bit about how that applies specifically to this region as well as the county overall. Next slide. From a watershed geography perspective, this is an incredibly diverse region actually, because much of the eastern part of the region, sort of Glen Burnie, up towards the Baltimore city boundaries, obviously fairly heavily suburbanized, been developed over the course of the last half century or so. And then you've got Severn, the area at the top of the Severn River watershed, much of which is already protected as state land, the Severn Run Natural Area. So you've got large, thousands of acres of tracts of forest there. And so there's some different challenges, some different opportunities there. And this graphic, which will be included in the slide deck, also shows the individual projects that our Bureau has undertaken over the course of the last decade in terms of water quality, stormwater management, but it's available as an interactive map on the county's website as well, and we can share that information to you as well, so you can dig into it a little bit further. Next slide, please. So, like I say, our Bureau is focused on water quality improvement, in particular, focusing on sediment and nutrient reductions for the bay and its tributaries. The federal government, EPA, has put in place about 10 years ago requirements that each of the jurisdictions in the Bay States basically take steps to reduce those nutrient and sediment inputs into local waterways in order to improve the health of the rivers in the Chesapeake Bay. So our program's focused on that. We're also focused broadly in terms of the county's efforts on habitat loss. So working with our sister agencies in planning and zoning and inspections and permits, trying to minimize forest loss and fragmentation and trying to protect stream buffers. Yes, ma'am.
I don't really understand what's meant by the phrase nutrient pollution.
Sure. Okay, good question. So nutrient pollution consists of nitrogen and phosphorus, which are byproducts of fertilizer or wastewater discharges, or in an agricultural setting, phosphorus is applied to the soil in order to get plants to grow more vigorously. And it's also naturally binds to soil. And so if you have a eroding stream like this situation that you're seeing here, when that soil breaks off and gets transported downstream, obviously the sediment itself is a problem in the water column, blocks light for plants that are living in the water and that sort of thing. But the phosphorus that's bound to that nutrient also then fuels algae blooms, which can draw the oxygen out of the water column and cause problems for crabs or oysters or other aquatic life.
So that comes from the fertilizer?
It can come from fertilizer, it can come from wastewater. So this district, I think it's in this district, Cox Creek, the wastewater treatment plant at the eastern end of this district, is actually the largest wastewater treatment plant in the county. And it operates at a very high efficiency at this point, but there are still discharges essentially from that plant into the bay, and there's some nutrients that are still retained in that discharge that goes out. So there's a variety of sources, but the main ones again would be, like you say, fertilizer, wastewater, other kinds of chemical applications to the developed landscape. Next slide. So again, the work that we do in public works is sort of one element of a much larger strategy in terms of the county's efforts. I mentioned the federal requirements under the Clean Water Act that the county has. So there's a stormwater permit, this NPDES, National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System discharge permit that we have, and then the total maximum daily load is sort of this bay-wide federal effort. And for the county, the primary strategies for reducing those nutrients and pollution into our waterways are threefold. One was the upgrade of all of the county's major wastewater treatment plants to the highest levels of technology. So the county had 6, it has 7 now. Wastewater treatment plants spread throughout the county. There's several in the Patuxent, there's one in Annapolis, there's Cox Creek, one in nearby Sandy Point. And each of those plants, basically over the course of the last decade or so, has been upgraded to the limits of treatment technology and are almost uniformly actually performing well below their permit limits. And that was done. Some folks may recognize the term, the Bay Restoration Funds. People called it the flush tax at the time. It was a state revenue source essentially that matched local money for the upgrade of those plants for the course of the last couple decades. And so across the state, Maryland has made great strides in reducing nutrients and sediment to Chesapeake Bay as a result of those wastewater treatment plant upgrades. So that's one piece. The second is the stormwater program, which I'll talk about in more detail in subsequent slides. And then the third is septic system upgrades. So throughout Anne Arundel County, about 40,000 homes are on septic systems. Then not so much in this area, but as you get further towards the middle of the county and further south, where there are homes that are, distributed away from the existing public infrastructure in terms of sewer networks, many homes are on septic systems, and those septic systems, although they're really effective at addressing the bacterial issues associated with wastewater, they still discharge quite a bit of nitrogen to the groundwater. And then if you think about those homes, surrounding rivers or streams that drain to rivers, they're basically contributors, sort of silent contributors of nitrogen to those waterways on a regular basis. So the county has a strategy working with the health department to basically upgrade many of those septic systems. There's actually a grant program the health department has for upgrading septic systems. And then also is looking at opportunities to bring communities that are close to the public infrastructure onto the public sewer network where that makes sense. So those are the three sort of elements there. Forest Conservation Act is a code at the state level. It is translated to the county level and enforced by the Office of Planning and Zoning. So in terms of new development activities, there are limits on the amount of forest clearing that can occur with new development activity. There are required set-asides of forest for properties that are developed. And in some cases, there are mitigation requirements. So if you're impacting more forest than you're allowed, you may have to pay to reforest somewhere else or to do other kind of mitigation as a result. So that's the Office of Planning and Zoning who's reviewing those grading plans when they're coming in for the subdivision process. Planning and Zoning also enforces the natural features elements, which are part of the county code. So again, forest conservation, but there's also, county has its own stream and buffer protection requirements, basically 100-foot buffers from streams in addition to the protection of the stream themselves. There are wetlands and wetland buffers, 25-foot buffers off wetlands. County has a bog protection area, so there are lots of there are bogs spread throughout the county, but particularly on the north side of the Magothy River. There are areas where there are these essentially high quality wetlands that have additional protections. And then steep slopes. So there are protections for areas of steep slopes so that those aren't developed, so that there's soil loss and that kind of thing. So all of those elements are considered as development plans come in. Generally, the county likes to see developers avoid those impacts. If they have to impact those resources, they're required to get what's called a modification. They go through a county process to get those exemptions, but by and large, try to keep them out of those areas. Floodplains, the county's been pretty progressive on this front for a long time. The county has required the fee simple dedication of floodplains on projects that come in for subdivision process. So if you've got a 100-acre parcel and you've got 5 acres that are in floodplain, basically you're titling that to the county as part of the subdivision process. In residential development, in commercial development, usually the county gets an easement over those areas. So the county's been very good at keeping development out of those flood prone areas for some time, and has taken steps to basically acquire and protect those areas as the county's been developed. And then the critical area ordinance, and the critical area is the 1,000-foot buffer from the edge of tide water. There are certain protections and limitations in place. They're tightened up as you get to within 100 feet of tide water. And again, that's enforced by the Office of Planning and Zoning through the development process. And really, again, applies primarily to waterfront properties, or near waterfront properties. But as you can see, the county has a whole suite of environmental protections that it reviews. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the work that we do, in particular in public works. So the maybe less exciting but more critical work is the stormwater infrastructure repair and replacement. So you think of the closed storm drain networks that exist throughout the county, basically the pipes that get stormwater from one place to another. Many of those pipes, especially in areas like Glen Burnie and northern part of the county, may have been installed 50 or 60 years ago. The lifespan of these corrugated metal pipes is 35 or 40 years. And so it's not unusual for us to come across situations where we're doing routine inspections. This is on Clark Station Road over in Severn. We identified this, realized that the pipe was basically like Swiss cheese, and had to come in and emergency close the road for a couple of days, basically replace the pipe, do the asphalt preparation. But one of the things, and this is sort of, gets to the history of the county, is that I think, folks think that maybe the way things are now is the way they've been, but really, if you look at the history of infrastructure, there's really been an evolution. So in like the early 1980s, even water and sewer were paid for basically out of the general fund. You didn't get a dedicated utility bill for water and sewer service. And at that time, the county's infrastructure was in very poor repair. The county was under consent orders, and basically there were many risks associated with that. The county put in place in the 80s dedicated water and sewer utility fees, and now has a world-class program 35 years later as a result of being able to really stay on top of the maintenance and not having to compete for maintenance dollars with the school system or with the police department or whatnot. In Anne Arundel County, it's only been about 10 years that we've had a dedicated stormwater funding program. We have a stormwater utility fee, watershed protection and restoration fee is what it's called, on your property tax bill. That basically goes for us to be able to do a similar kind of thing with our stormwater infrastructure. So we can now be proactive about dealing with this infrastructure and addressing it before we're having to get into a catastrophic response situation. Next slide. So this is just the road closed, and like I say, it's a 40-inch pipe that was replaced. We're also dealing in Clark Station Road. We also have we call it a resilience project. So it's sort of a flood mitigation project that's going on in this same area that will go in the next year or two as a result of some road flooding issues. Next slide. So I'm going to set the context in terms of the sort of stormwater management by just giving a brief history of the practice. Contemporary stormwater management really wasn't even a thing until the 1980s. At that point, there were some requirements around flood control, but you think of a community like Glen Burnie that was developed in the 50s, or much of which was developed in the 50s and 60s. There was no stormwater management requirement at that point. And so during this 1980s era, you had what were called dry ponds, basically facilities that were intended to shave the peak off of big storm events, but then just slowly let it out to avoid flooding, but really didn't provide much water quality benefit. Next slide. In the 2000 era or so, the state updated its design manual, basically beginning to focus on water quality. And so that was the era sort of the stormwater ponds, as we think about them, depending upon how old your community is. You may have sort of a big wet pond, which was the sort of most common approach at that time. Basically collect all the water for the development into a single location, store it, have a permanent pool where you'll have opportunity for some nutrient processing for sediment to drop out, and then slowly let that water out. Next slide. And then we've now moved into an era called environmental site design as of about a decade ago. So this is a community out in West County called Watershed in the Laurel area, where they've basically done what's called like distributed stormwater management practice. So it's a lot more, generally, it consists of a lot more small practices trying to catch water as close to where it falls on the landscape, whether that be next to a rooftop or a parking lot, and get it into the ground as quickly as possible. Really hyper-focused on water quality and trying to distribute the collection of stormwater. Next slide. For our program, we focused on 3 different kinds of strategies primarily. The first is going into older communities where there were existing stormwater management facilities. This is the Mill Race community over off Veterans Highway in Millersville. It is in the district. This was a very large dry pond that they had in that area. It's a townhouse community. Next slide. We were able to work with the community basically and turn this into what's called a stormwater wetland. So we took a portion of that area, which at the time, before any of the planning and zoning folks were here, were working with the county. At the time, that old dry pond was allowed to be the rec area, and the stormwater management facility wasn't really graded either. It was kind of a soggy field. So when we went in, we basically elevated about a quarter of that field to like a proper ball field for the community, put a walking path through, and then turned the other 3/4 into a stormwater wetland. Basically, it's got a natural habitat landscape, but it's providing water storage before that water gets down to Severn Run. The community's been very happy with it so far. It was a community without necessarily a lot of natural resources to begin with. So it was a give and take, a back and forth, and I think it worked out nicely at the end. Next slide. This is a project in the Severn Run area on the DNR property. It's off Naholes Road in Millersville. The runoff from Route 97 and Route 32 in that part of the county was in many cases just discharged onto steep sandy slopes in the Severn Run area, causing a tremendous amount of damage. For the most part, though, that was out of sight, out of mind, because it's not an area where a lot of people go. But there was a tremendous amount of material that moved into the headwaters of the Severn River and caused some damage. So we went in, basically restored these outfall areas. Next slide. This is that area post restoration. We basically go in, reinforce those areas where water is flowing through, and create a naturalized habitat and a safe conveyance system, essentially, for that water to get back into the Severn Run, to provide habitat, and then to address those erosion issues. Next slide. This was state of the art. Oh, yes, ma'am.
Back to the previous slide.
Yeah.
So is there like a program in place to maintain this, or is it just something that you guys we're gonna have to go back in and continue to maintain and retrofit as the years go on?
So the county is responsible for the maintenance of these practices. So in the case of the stormwater facility at Mill Race, that was actually what was called a private pond. So the county or the community had been responsible for it. Part of the negotiation was that the county would take over responsibility for maintaining it, for the ability to access it. And so, with the dedicated funding, we're in a position to be able to do that. Especially a lot of these older communities don't necessarily have the resources. And so, we, generally speaking, are responsible for maintaining on a site like this. The idea would be that other than maybe some invasive plant control, like that it would be fairly self-maintaining. We just let it naturalize. And unless there's some kind of failure of the structural features, we would probably be pretty hands-off. But one of the things our permit requires is that we inspect all of these sites on at least a 3-year basis in terms of making sure that they're still functional and operational. Oh, yes, ma'am.
On
Yeah,
that same
yeah.
slide is, do we use local substrate if at all possible, or are we trucking it in, or?
It's a good question. So one of the preference is to use local material to the extent we can. When we're using stone, there isn't local stone availability. In the past, we've actually used what's called sandstone, and sort of references this, this quartzite, or this, it's basically like iron concretion material that is available, but it's just not available at the scale at this point that we would need for this. So there is sometimes that we're incorporating granite, or you can see the cobblestone here is silica that might be coming from like Calvert County, or, not too far off, but not necessarily.
Not like geoengineered grid or?
Not generally. Okay, so back to this one. Furnace, next slide, yeah. Furnace Branch, that was mentioned in the last presentation. So the real interesting backstory there. This tributary, which is just literally across the street, was engineered in the mid-60s. This was state-of-the-art stormwater management in 1965 or whatever. Basically, create a concrete trapezoidal ditch, vent the water down to the Patapsco River as quickly as possible off those neighborhoods. I mean, it addressed flooding in the neighborhoods, but it also shot, stormwater and all the runoff from those communities down to the area. And at a site like this, I mean, you can only imagine, after we did the project, which essentially involved the complete removal of that concrete trapezoidal channel, the amount of trash that was moving through this system on an annual basis was astonishing. And one of the great things about the project actually is that all of the trash now collects at about like the top 100 or 200 feet of the project in the vegetation, so it's easy to access. But it's still coming. The stream itself is actually in a culvert for probably a mile, almost from where we're standing here today down to it's Kent and New Jersey Avenue, I think, basically is the location. And so what we did was we removed that concrete trapezoidal channel, created a stream and wetland complex through there. There had been basically no biological activity in that stream. As recently as a year or two ago, we sampled and found 6 different fish species in that stream post restoration. And so, and actually there were some folks who were, old timers who'd lived in this area who, ironically enough, said what we had built looked like what it had been, similar to what it had been before they had put the concrete channel in. So this area, much of Marley Creek still looks like that concrete trapezoidal channel. There are areas of Cabin Branch closer to Baltimore City. And so we're looking at a lot of those as opportunities for retrofit or for restoration, because many of those are sort of at the end of their usable lifespan.
So that was really, that was a grass to concrete culvert. So did you bring in these plant species?
Yes, yeah. So we're required to plant all of our projects. I mean, one of the things is you get a lot of actual natural recruitment on these sites too, but we do plant them pretty vigorously. Yeah. Next slide. Just talk about a couple more things. One is we have a grant program through the Chesapeake Bay Trust. The county gives about $1 million a year to the trust to administer as grants that go out to local nonprofit organizations throughout the county. There are groups all across the county, and we try to be sensitive to geographic representation that get these funds. There was a St. Mark's Church by the BWI received funding from us. Chestnut Hill Cove, which is a community, again, it's on the border of Region 1 or 3, has received funding for us. But these are basically aimed at nonprofit organizations or community groups or religious groups who are trying to do water quality improvement projects on their property or with partners. Don't be intimidated if you don't have a lot of experience. We've got a grant manager on staff who can help walk people through any questions that come up. So if you've got questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out to me and I'll put people in touch. Next slide. We have an annual report that's available online. I'll give this to Michael so that he can put it into your document as well. It talks about how the money is spent, where the money is coming from, and all those good things. Next slide. And then we're also doing funding shoreline restoration efforts across the county. There's not a ton of shoreline actually in Region 3, but this is a project down at the mouth of the Severn on a property. There's some work that's been done up at Fort Smallwood Park, which is that Region 1. It's close. So nearby. And so we're involved in that because that's another sort of element of these restoration efforts. Next slide. And then also, like I said, with the Truck Station Road example, we're working closely with our Highways Bureau as well as our Resilience Authority to look at opportunities for addressing flood risk. I think one of the real helpful things that could come out of this regional planning group is that if you all are aware of areas that are persistent flood problems and maybe we're not aware of it, to bring those to our attention would certainly be helpful. It may be coastal flooding associated with high tides, or it may be infrastructure that needs to be maintained properly, but that would help if you could bring that to our attention. Next slide. All right, I'll turn it over to Noah. Question? Oh, do we have time for questions?
We can do a couple.
Okay, all right.
Question.
Yes, sir.
You mentioned that there were grants available for the south area,
No, for the whole county.
for the whole county? Okay, for example, in Severn, the Queenstown area, there are a lot of houses and businesses along that stretch. Those grants, are they only for residences or for businesses as well?
It could be either, yeah. So, generally speaking, our grant program really isn't set up for individual residences, but if, let's say you've got a homeowners association, or you've got a community association, and you've got a property that is a shared property where there'd be an opportunity to do a project of a certain scale, that would be the kind of thing that we would generally support. But if there's a business that would like to do this kind of work, we can coordinate with them. We've actually done grants through our program before to businesses who are looking to either to retrofit existing stormwater practices or maybe to put them where they hadn't existed previously. And there's opportunities for savings or credits on their stormwater fee as a result of some of those things as well. So, yeah. Good. Yes, ma'am.
To tie down to that, sorry, Krista Feliciano, are there do you have a prioritized list of either communities that you would say the runoff is significant here or the infrastructure is severely dated? So if they would be prioritized, we would have grant funding for them?
We don't have a list that's sort of at that level of resolution. I think, if you were to engage us and say, well, look, we're interested in doing something in my community, but we're not sure what the opportunities are. We've got issues associated with localized flooding or that kind of thing. We'd be happy to work with you sort of at a conceptual level to figure out what the right strategy might be, and then also probably point you to, engineers who could help you get something that's a little bit more sophisticated in terms of plans. But a lot of our work is driven by where there's the interest, there's the activity, there's sort of the wherewithal to get this work done. I mean, the way I like to look at it is like it's a vehicle for the county to help communities help themselves essentially, so that the money is not an obstacle if there's a lot of will or interest on the part of the communities to get that work done. Yes, ma'am.
So what are they doing at Fort Smallwood Park about the water and the development over there? Because it still looks like 1965 over there. I haven't seen much change.
Well, so the reference to Fort Smallwood Park was the shoreline stabilization. The county's undertaken significant amount of shoreline stabilization, including some what's called placing of revetment, which is just stone, but also doing some living shoreline work on sort of the either side of the park. So there's the improvements really have been to protect the park from eroding away in that regard. In terms of the internal park improvements, I can't speak to that. I'm not really that aware. I don't know if there's an opportunity to engage with the parks and rec folks at some point during this process or not.
Well, what about the water? Because I remember I used to go there in 1965. I didn't see it clean and it didn't smell like it smells now.
Yeah, the Patapsco, particularly in that area, is heavily impacted by wastewater treatment plants. So Cox Creek is not far from that area, generally a pretty effectively running plant. I'm not sure how much you followed the news, but Baltimore City has Back River and Patapsco wastewater treatment plants further up the Patapsco that have had, let's say, ongoing issues in terms of running properly. And so I don't know specifically. I do know that the failure of those plants to operate properly for the past several years has caused some issues with regards to particularly nutrient over enrichment in the water, and maybe seems like they're getting those under control with the Maryland Department of the Environment, and hopefully once those inputs are reduced, we'll see water quality improve in the Patapsco as well. Everything's not under our control in terms of these local.
Right.
These kind of sites are great for the next pieces. We're gonna get the breakout groups. We'll talk real specifically around a map with Eric and others, talk about specific recommendations might have on particular places in the region. But I want to kind of hook on to that comment about communities helping communities help themselves. We've invited the Watershed Stewards Academy folks to kind of talk to us tonight. That's really their core mission as well. So I'd like to introduce Noel Chow, Jeffrey Pond.
Hey, everybody.
Hi.
My name's Noelle Chow. I'm the Director of Education and Equity Initiatives at Watershed Stewards Academy.
And I'm Jeff Pop, Director of Restoration, Watershed Stewards Academy. And how many people here have heard of Watershed Stewards Academy? 4.5, 5. All right.
Eric, you don't count.
And then how many people have or know a steward in their own community? Okay, great, good, good. More than I thought. Will raise their hand. Well, we're here to tell you a little bit about the Watershed Stewards Academy, so I'll turn it over.
So watershed issues need people solutions. What do we mean by that? Well, watershed issues, even though the word water's there, they're actually land issues. It means it's not just thinking about the rivers, the creeks, the forested areas, but it's about the spaces we call home. The spaces where we live, where we work, where we gather. It's where our communities are. And it's because of that that people have to be part of the solution. But how do people get started? We know from survey work that we've done that people want to do the right thing when it comes to the environment. They absolutely want to make the best choices possible. But how do they know what the right thing is? Who do they contact for information, for reliable resources? How can people become part of the solution? So that's where Watershed Stewards Academy comes in. Our mission is to train and mobilize community leaders to drive change for sustainable landscapes and clean waters. And we've been around since 2009. And the goal of this organization has always been to help residents of Anne Arundel County become more effective environmental leaders in their own communities. It's getting them the information and the resources they need so that they can lead their communities to take action. And so there's a few different things that we do. We offer training programs, we do restoration projects, and we also offer mentorship and support. And this is all so that people can become part of the solution and lead their communities to take action. So we've got stewards in neighborhoods, at congregations, at schools, at libraries, at county parks, at businesses, and they're all working together to improve our environment. One thing that I'll mention about our approach, which is a little bit unique, when we're talking to people about watershed issues, we're not just thinking about the technical science-oriented information that goes along with thinking about how to tackle them, but we're also thinking about how can we get people hands-on experience, and how can we also think through the social aspect of this, which is so important, right? Because you can have the right solution, but if you don't have buy-in from the people who need to be part of the solution, it's not going to happen. So when people are coming from so many different backgrounds, have so many different relationships to the water, to the land, it's important that we're training our watershed stewards to think about all of those things. I'm going to turn it over to Jeff, and he's going to talk a little bit about a special community that we've been working with in Glen Burnie for some time.
Yeah. So who knows Empowering Believers Church? It's off of Marley Neck. So it's a church, a congregation. As you can see, they have a huge flooding problem. Their congregation sits kind of at a bowl in a community. They get a ton of runoff from all of their neighbors in their community. And so, you know, what was the solution with them? So it was to work with them to train two of their pastor and their deacon, was to train them to become watershed stewards. And so they would understand exactly what the issue was they're dealing with and then how they could address it. And so by becoming a steward, they were able to work with their community, learn about these issues and come up with some potential solutions. So you can see two of our stewards there below and Apostle Thomas at the top. But it's really that network, that training and understanding the solutions that help build those communities. And they were able to kind of come up with a solution that worked for them. Obviously from a green infrastructure approach. So they installed rain gardens, they installed a lot of rainwater cisterns. Now they only had control over their own property, so they could do what they could on their own property, but we're still working with them. And so years ago, they completed a few different best management practices, stormwater best management practices. You can see their rain garden here. Next slide. But they brought a community of over 50 volunteers from 10 congregations, 10 partner congregations together to work on these projects. So in this case, they were installing a rain garden. They installed over 1,500 native plants in just this one congregation. And so that's what really Watershed Stewards Academy aims to do, is really to kind of empower really build up these communities so they can understand the steps that they can take to take action in their own communities.
And so one interesting thing that's happened over the last few years is we're having more and more stewards come to us who don't come from communities that are along the rivers that have water access. And so Rob Williams, right over here on the left, he's a great example of somebody who came to us because his community had serious drainage and flooding issues all across the property. And so Rob ended up training with us. He did a capstone project which addressed those issues. The following year, he got Ian Tran, who's up in the right-hand corner, to also take the class. Ian's another resident of Severn. And then together with the community of Millstone Village, the class that Ian was in did a community project that helped address some of those flooding and drainage issues that are in that community. And then just this past April in Severn Danza Park on the Severn, we had Sam Russell, who's currently training to be a steward, lead a trash cleanup at that park. She interviewed people who were going to the park, tried to figure out what things they were interested in, what their wants were, their needs were, and then she mobilized people to do a big cleanup. And because she's gotten a local reputation, now she's been organizing cleanups, I think, just about every month.
All right, so how do we get involved? How do you all, as the community, as the residents of this area, get involved? And I wanted to add one more thing about empowering believers that I forgot. So the projects that you saw on the slides, those were ones that have been done for a few years now. But we're really happy to announce that they received a grant for over $90,000 to do more work at their church and come up with potential solutions to treat all the stormwater on their property. So really excited to work with them on that. But how can you get involved? So we have several programs. As Noel mentioned, we have our main certification course, which is run annually. So if you're interested in becoming a watershed steward, we're always looking at attracting more from the various areas of Anne Arundel County. But we also have programs like Replant. And Replant is a program funded by our county partners. And this is really to help us address the tree canopy loss in our county. Our county has experienced a ton of tree canopy loss over the last 10 years, 10, 15 years. And so we're really trying to boost up that tree canopy. And so through Replant, we can work with you. We have a program called Tree Troopers. You can train to be a tree trooper and lead these community tree plantings in your own community, or you can just participate in the program by saying, hey, I've got a place to plant trees. We need some trees over here. Typically, our tree planting projects are about 15 or more trees. They can be planted by volunteers. So our staff can help you organize a volunteer planting event, working with the tree troopers. Or you can, if you don't have the manpower to do so, or if your community is a little bit on the older side and you don't have the physical capability to plant trees, we can also do that through contractor plantings. And that really comes out to about $25 to $45 per tree in the ground with deer protection and with mulch. And we're not talking little tiny saplings here. We're talking nice 6 foot trees. So it's a really great way, really great access to get trees in the ground. Also through Replant, we have a program that's open right now called Groves of Gratitude. And that program provides groves of trees. So basically groupings of trees. I think we've got 5 different groves that are all still available. Right now, if you go to our website, aawsa.org, you can order a grove. We've got an edible grove that has food that you can eat. We've got a screening grove that provides privacy. So they're all evergreens. We've got an oak grove. We know oaks are really important for habitat and wildlife. We've got a wild game grove if you're into hunting or you have a hunting property. And then we've got a pollinator grove to help sustain our pollinators, which typically is smaller understory trees. So that program, a lot of information. You can find out more on our website, but if you're interested in trees, please feel free to get in touch with myself, Noel, or Brady at our office, and we'd be happy to point you in the right direction. Stormwater Success is another program that we have open right now. This program is designed kind of more for communities that have those environmental site design projects that Eric was speaking of, for folks that have to maintain those. So if you have those projects and those types of projects in your community, you do have to maintain them. And as Eric said, they come out every 3 years and inspect them. And so this course is really to help you understand how to maintain them, what happens during that county inspection process, and how you can avoid fines by not maintaining that properly. And so it's really geared at HOA community leaders, condo associations, property managers, realtors, that kind of a thing. If you're an HOA and you're interested in taking this course, there's a code that we can provide you. You can take the course totally for free. Property managers and realtors, we do ask that you pay a small $50 fee to take this course, but it's really helpful. More information, there's a flyer in the back of the room if you want to look at it, and it's got my email on it, so you can always email me with questions.
Is it self-paced or is there a time frame that it
Yeah.
goes on?
So Stormwater Success, the 101 course, it's three different events or courses. The 101 is self-paced, so you can take it now through November 16th. It's just 2 online 1-hour videos. And then the 201 course is on November 16th in the evening. That will be virtual. So in case you don't want to drive all the way to Millersville, we used to do it in person. But now we're doing it virtual, so you'll be able to interact with your county partners, our city partners, but also hear a little bit more, dive deeper into this topic. And then we have a field session on November 18th, which will take place in Severn at 2 communities, one being Millstone Village. We will actually get to see some of these practices in the ground. Nope, not done yet. All right, so I talked about tree troopers. So tree ambassadors and tree troopers, very similar programs. The main difference is basically we're training you to become leaders in your community to get trees in the ground. So you see all these photos here. They're all from Tree Trooper and Tree Ambassador program. Our Tree Ambassador and Tree Trooper program. Our Tree Ambassador program was developed really to reach new audiences and audiences that may not have the time or capacity to kind of go out there and plant trees. And so with our Tree Ambassador program, we do provide a stipend. So you get a stipend for taking the course. You get a stipend for participating in the planting event. You get a stipend for putting trees in the ground, getting a project in the ground. And then there's another stipend available to pay for the maintenance of that tree. And that is grant funded. And so, we have the funds as long as they last. That's a grant through our Maryland Plant Trees program with the Chesapeake Bay Trust and the Urban Trees program. But those are our 2 tree planting initiatives that you guys can really become involved with if you're interested. Yes.
Are there programs with this or with the replant Arundel that, if we have like oak blight or something like that and trees nearby, but we still have the ability to plant new trees that we're not carrying disease from the older canker trees or something, so that we can also have those removed and recognize that?
Yeah, so we don't provide any funding for removal, but we can definitely provide you replacement trees. We can't provide trees where they're required to be planted. So if it's a mitigation planting or something like that, we can't provide that. But as long as they're volunteer planted, your community wants to increase their urban tree canopy, you can do that through replant.
And last slide. So what do you need to make a difference in your community? One of the things that we're going to be doing in 2024 through a grant that we received from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation is specifically doing community listening sessions and survey work in northern and western Anne Arundel County. So definitely Region 3 is part of that, to figure out what folks in your community would need from us to be more effective environmental leaders and stewards. We know that the class that we've been offering for the last 15 years, while it's worked great for some people, it's had so many barriers to success for others, partly because it is so time intensive. And so we're just trying to figure out, what do people want? What would they need from us? If you're interested in being part of that, I'm going to send around a sign-up sheet. If you give us your email address, your name, you can check off if you're interested in learning more about replant, but also if you're interested in staying in touch about these new programs, and we can be in touch about that. Thanks, everybody. Yes.
Go ahead.
So there was a trash cleanup section of that. I know a lot of community-based organizations do trash cleanup, whether it's Adopt a Highway or different programs like that. Does your organization have any support for those organizations that already have a responsibility or volunteer in some way?
We could. I think that's what happened with one of Sam Russell's recent cleanups. Somebody reached out to her and said, hey, we've got this situation going on in Odenton. Will you be able to help? You've done this before. And so she was able to form a partnership with the Patuxent Riverkeeper, with the local police, because the site had so much glass and needles on it. They had emergency vehicles there too, an ambulance there to make sure that everybody at the cleanup was safe. But definitely our stewards can network with anybody really to get stuff done. Michael?
So with, have you tried to be involved with the school system? For example, at the Center for Applied Technology North, they actually have an environmental management program, which this would basically fall right into, and this is where you would get the young people involved. And that's where, you know, we're basically, we're all only going to be around for so much longer. The next generation needs to learn about these things, and this would be a perfect opportunity for people going through that type of program to see an actual, you know, what they're learning about actually in use in the real world.
Yeah, thank you for that. I couldn't agree more. And what I can share, and which we didn't get a chance to share at the beginning, is that our organization has had a partnership with Arlington Echo and Arundel County Public Schools Outdoor Education Center since our inception. So our offices are actually located in Millersville at Arlington Echo. I'm going to be meeting with the director, Melanie Parker, tomorrow to be talking about our connections with schools. But it's really something that we've been working on more in the past few years and really like intensively focusing energy on. So we were able to bring on a new staff member who's our community engagement specialist, and he's been able to work and coordinate directly with schools. So I think we've had high school students take our certification course the last 2 years in a row. 2 years ago, it was 2 young women from North County High School. This year, it's a young woman from Smyrna Park. But we're always interested in thinking through how more high school students could be involved in that or in the Tree Trooper or Tree Ambassador program.
Okay.
No, just to mention on that front, so we actually work closely with Arlington Echo as well through their Chesapeake Connections program. So what we try to do is a certain portion of the projects that we build, we actually have Arlington Echo come in with the school kids. They plant the site, they do a science lesson while they're out there, and use that as an opportunity to sort of do a outdoor classroom type activity. And so there's really good relationship with schools already.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
I'm gonna give you guys a break in just a minute. You've been sitting for a long time, hearing a lot of information. I want to share a little bit more about kind of land conservation efforts in the county, and then we'll break up and give you guys 5 and reconvene in small groups. We can kind of just discuss this around some maps, think about specific recommendations you guys might want to think about for the region. So, slide please. I wanted just to touch a minute on land conservation efforts in the county. We have a copy of this map we'll be able to look at in more detail in the small groups. But you know, we've kind of talked about the stormwater. We talked about, you know, the changes in the watershed, the change in the landscape from, you know, pre-settlement times to today, how we've lost so much forest, how there's been such a change in the landscape. The county does have a lot of several programs focused around land conservation. Of course, we're all familiar with our county parks. So the county has acquired over time lands, as well as mentioned before, the state has that big green area over here, the Severn Run Natural Area. This figure is showing county and state and federal parks, as well as areas that we're kind of planning for future land conservation. This was developed through a plan that we developed a couple of years ago called the Green Infrastructure Master Plan. It's a way to think about what are the remaining natural areas in the county, to think about how we try to preserve their conservation through voluntary measures. So the map shows areas in kind of 2 shades of green. The darker green are our protected parks or other spaces that have conservation easements or protections on them. Light green doesn't have any kind of special protections. So those get to be prioritized in county's efforts for land conservation. Some of those programs that we have in the county that are active are, of course, recreation and parks. I mentioned before, they do their proximity, their equity analysis. They've got a real focus right now, especially on kind of North and West County, acknowledging that, you know, when you look at these maps, there's a lot more green in South County and West County than there is up in Central and North. We try to balance that out to make sure there is access to green open space where we have our biggest concentrations of population. A couple of things noteworthy there are, you know, near Mead Village, the county acquired, I think it's about 25-acre parcel. It's undeveloped now. They're just thinking about what the future of it could be. It's called West County Park. County also just last year acquired some additional land next to Severn Danza Park to be able to expand that. Again, create some more, allow more access to green space in that area. And a couple areas that I think are worth noting and thinking about as you're thinking about the landscape here, and as we're thinking in the future about land use and zoning, is of course, we have a lot of development out on Marley Neck, right? All the tenure code developments. That area has been a big swath of green space, and that's been kind of decreasing over time as the area develops. So it shows up on this map where we still have large areas of forest that's still there, natural area that's still there. There's something to think about throughout this whole process about kind of what you guys see as the future of that area. So with that in mind, I'd say let's take 5, and then we'll come back. We'll kind of gather around 2 tables at both ends of the room. Over here, we'll talk about kind of this open space, parks and conservation. Over on that side, we can talk more about water quality. And again, Tom's going to be to think about some of the recommendations that were in the briefing paper that was sent to you. It's kind of just like seeds of thoughts to begin you guys to think about. And to try to go through tonight, kind of identify what are the issues that you see as important to address in the region, and what kind of ideas might want to move forward to recommend. And we'll have time to refine through the process. We're trying to brainstorm tonight and think about what recommendations we want to include related to environmental issues. So with that, we'll take 5. And we'll pause the recording for those on Zoom. We'll also pause while we're in breakout groups. We can't really, is there?
Where's your, you guys located at? Right there, Odenton Circle. Oh, I did not, okay. I said, share that.
No.
We want to start over here? Yeah. All right, so.
They got fancier than us.
Water, but we found that there was a lot of other things that came up, kind of that all went along with the water situation. But we had 5 or 6 main big points that we wanted to address. One of them is flooding. So there's a lot of areas in our region that have flooding on the main roads. And we pointed out a couple specific ones from the community feedback, and then just from personal experience on commuting to work often. There's some places where there might be a sign, but by the time you're reading the sign, you're in the flood zone at the road. Things like that. It was great to have Eric in our group because he said he's taking notes too. He's like, you give us that feedback, we can try to fix that. But on our broad scale, if you see anything and it's flooding, we can get all that information in on specific spots and try to fix that. For cleanup, we said that there was a whole lot of trash in the area and that there seems to be a lot more trash out there. We talked about maybe doing one of those big trash wheels, but it's not really practical on our tiny creeks as much so. But water is important. We want to make sure we're collecting it, getting the community involved and taking stewardship of some of these places. One of the places that was recently redone where they took out the concrete and put in all the plants, it's catching it closer, so it's more condensed and it's easier to access to get those places cleaner. So making sure that people know and take advantage of that. For the green infrastructure, we wanted to remove those channelizations, those big concrete places, make it more natural. Make sure the water is actually flowing correctly and going through the process. There's some regions where there's tons of sand in the soil, naturally helps it to get cleaner. And we just think the more green infrastructure, the more that it's built into the plans, the better. And also with the septic situation, there's grants available, there's money available out there even already that if you're on a septic system and you want to have
a newer version that's actually taken this nitrogen out and making it cleaner. They're very generous grants, which tied back into education. Every time we brought something up, it seems like there's something maybe in place or there's something that can be improved. There's money out there with these different organizations and the county, and just having the knowledge put out there so that people can take advantage of it, making sure the communication's good and education's good, is gonna help tie all that together to keep our water great. Anything I missed?
Redevelopment.
Redevelopment. Oh, yeah, redevelopment. We talked about making transportation centered redevelopment. Everything kind of ties into each other. You can't ignore transportation and then redevelop. You can't ignore the environment and then get the education piece. So just making sure all these things are tied in together. And then also reducing the impervious structures that are out there that aren't being useful right now. Talk about Marley Station Mall. It is ginormous and not doing so hot right now. So specific places like that. We brought up just a couple of those, but in general, reducing the surfaces that are out there, taking up the rainwater. And we're gonna do a Taco Tuesday night next time. I want to bring some fajita or anything.
All right, so we have the open spaces, the green spaces, topic, and so we have the top 5 that we have here. Access to safe parks, safe open spaces, whether that's lighted trails, entrances to get into the park are more accessible, making sure that the access and the trails itself in the green spaces are safe enough to use before early in the morning or afternoon. We talked about living communities that can walk to parks, but making things, in your community where you don't have to drive to a park, and making the park so that it's not just an open green space, it's a purposeful space. There are a lot of parks out in Howard County, and there's some out in Prince George's County that are purposeful spaces. Yes, it's park spaces, but there's more to do than just open fields there. So making sure that the parks, one, are within the community, they can walk there and that they're purposeful space. We talked about green spaces as part of an economic development and quality of life, right? So that all of that feeds together. It's not just, I'm gonna put this open spot for kids to play on, and it's separate from the community needs. We had a lot of conversations about involving the community in the development of these green spaces. The community will tell you what they need. They'll tell you what type of activities they want, but you have to involve them in the development. And as you build out the spaces, make sure that's what they need, whether it's places to do cookouts, places to do, basketball courts or soccer fields. Involve the community in that conversation. We also talked about the relationships between schools and parks and how a lot of the Department of Education areas are not really purposed for or useful for open spaces, even though they have really nice open spaces. You can't access them, all right? You shouldn't access them due to legal liability reasons, and I'm sure that there are some. But figuring that conversation out, where you have this usable land and these really nice fields and spaces, but it is not meant for the community outside of school hours. And the need to balance conservation and the need for housing. There was some good comments about how the Parks and Rec plan had, we want to cut down some trees, and then a different plan says we want more trees, right, in the same area. Right, and somehow the plans sometimes don't, they're not consistent, and that it may seem like they contradict each other. And how you have so much need for housing, and yet you want to create more green spaces. But if you don't create the housing, then you have people coming from out of state. You have people coming from Pennsylvania, from Virginia to work in Maryland, but then they leave Maryland to live because there's not enough affordable housing. Yeah. Did I miss?
Yeah, you did good.
Anything else? All right,
Good.
all right.
Yeah.
You guys made a lot of progress on these ideas. For our next step, what we're gonna do is we'll get those on paper and share them out with you. We'll actually be able to, if you guys are okay with it, we'll share it with the public too. At kind of like the end of November to December, We'll have a drop-in session, as Patrick mentioned earlier, or we can kind of share some of the information that we shared today on some poster boards and put those on a list and get people's feedback on those ideas. And put them on an online survey too. Again, we're trying to make sure the public's engaged with us as we walk through this process. They can get real-time input saying, hey, this is what we're talking about. We can get feedback from community members about, are they with us on this? Can we bring them along? Are there things that they would like us to revise and refine? So, yeah.
Very good. I think we can wrap it up at this. Well, so typically, in our meetings, we do have a public comment period where members of the public who would like to provide comment to the SAC could speak for a 2-minute time frame. We also accept written comments of any length at our email address, region3@aacounty.org. So is there anybody from the public who would like to
So it looks like we
speak
have,
for 2 minutes?
one hand raised. So,
Okay,
Bernie, Robinson, if you're still there, I'm gonna, allow you to talk if you want to give a comment.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me? What?
Yes.
Yes.
Do you want me to turn it up? I can barely hear you. Okay, so, I just want to say that, one of the key goals, especially for this particular SAC region, is to increase tree canopy, not reduce it. And additionally, that tree canopy provides fossil fuel carbon sequestration, which reduces the impact of climate change and which is hypercritical. And plus our forests produce oxygen, which our wonderful community in this region, this county, the state needs. And when you have unique and biodiverse forests, they should not have trees ripped from them to be replaced by multi-athletic fields and basketball courts where there are other areas that have already been leveled and there are no trees standing within this region. And therefore, I strongly support that we need to protect what little of our true forest and biodiversity remains for the sake of our wildlife, as well as the interconnection with our mankind and community. And I appreciate my opportunity for input. Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have any other comments from the public? If not, I will close the public comment period. And if you'll put up the next slide, just very quickly talk about the next steps. Mike mentioned we're going to hold a community drop-in session on this environmental topic, just like what Mike had said, putting out some of these initial strategies and getting some input from folks. We'll do that Tuesday, November 28th at the Severn Library. Please share that with your communities and let folks know. We will send you all an email as well. We will have an online questionnaire that will be related to this during that time frame. Don't have start and end dates to that yet, but we will let you know. And then our next meeting will be Tuesday, December 5th, 5:30 to 8:30 at Baltimore Washington Medical Center. We'll send out a little bit more information about that. And I think please feel free to bring, a bagged, sandwich or something if you would like to do that as well. We will continue to bring some, some snack type of stuff as well.
So Taco Tuesday is not an option.
Bring your own
We-
I can't if you bring your own tacos, but I might be able to figure out.
There we go.
That's
Okay,
right, yeah. We're gonna make the journey work.
That's all that we've had. One,
I have a question about our process. Like, this was awesome discussion today for sure. As we all learn about each of these subjects moving forward and have our discussion, at some point we start talking about, we're gonna get out the pen and paper and talk. Okay. I guess is not the big idea. So we're learning and we're talking and then, I don't know, month 8, I don't know, make it months, but how do you have an advice for us as we transition from like learning and talking to like create something implementable or something that you can use?
yeah, so the first, 5 or so meetings are going to be these kind of topic focused. Then we're going to get into land use and zoning and kind of apply some of what we talked about here and what we learned are some of the priorities. And we're going to look at how does that impact the way we need to think about future land use and then zoning as well. And then we will be drafting, we the staff will help, based on what we're hearing, draft a very initial draft of a region plan, give that to you all for your, input, reaction, and we'll expect kind of some heavy marking up from you all on that before it goes out to, public and through the process as well. We will put together a little bit more detailed schedule to kind of give some dates to all of that, even if they're just anticipated, as well as public input touchstones, some of these drop-in sessions that we're planning and things like that, so that you can sort of mark that and kind of have in your mind as you're sharing with folks in your communities, ways that they can get involved as well. Does that kind of answer your question?
So as we move from section to section, I know we're recording and we're also taking the notes here. Is the expectation for that the notes will be gathered and when the time comes for the planning, for the actual implementation of this, what we recommend, for us to bring those points back, or will the notes be provided? Like, here's what we talked about in this session, right? Keep track of the notes.
Yeah, keep your own notes for sure, but then we will hopefully be trying to pull it all together, and then we'll look for you all to kind of, through your own lens, make sure, did we get it right? What are we missing? Where are the gaps? And just a point of process, we are going to be producing meeting notes for each of these meetings that you all will need to approve, and we're going to bring notes from this meeting and actually the kickoff meeting as well to the next meeting that we'll have you all. We'll send that out ahead of time.
As we get down the path, since we started off with 139, or 139, is it? Will we come back in and have kind of a congruence so that we can say, hey, we felt really good about, we all checked our notes, we all did, all these things worked out well, but if they came up with something else, that would be better for us. Or they came up with something that is completely incongruent with our ideas and we really need to work together. Like, how do we do that?
Go ahead.
I would say the same staff are working amongst different plans. So as we say, for example, we're gonna have this meeting with, based on your ideas, we'll have some draft recommendations on that environment. We'll share those with the teams working on regions 1 and 9 as well. And plans 2, 4, and 7 have, kind of gone through their public review with the planning board now. So we're gonna have that to look at as well. So yes, we'll be looking to see, oh, yeah, they had a great idea over here. And if we see that, we'll kind of bring it back to you guys, we leave it in and share it. There'll be some particular properties once we get to that space where it's like the Cromwell Station is like right on the line between 1 and 3. And there might be conversations in both groups about that. And again, we'll make sure they get stitched together. If somebody's saying something radically different, we'll make sure that we talk about it.
Good point, because a lot of the Fort Meade and that region really connects to a lot of our region.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you all very much. I think we can be adjourned. We will be in touch, and if you all need anything from us, please.
Do you want our
reach
name
out.
tag somewhere?
We'll hold on to the name tags.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll bring them next time.
Oh, see you tomorrow, yeah. So, Jason,
Yes,
so you were good. So you were, yes, you were in the project manager.